Green Sheet is a financial publication of the MWRA Advisory Board. This installment provides a brief overview of the MWRA's proposed FY18 current expense budget. When it was created in 1984, in the same enabling act that created the MWRA, the Advisory Board was charged with its most important statutory obligation, to annually review and comment on the MWRA's proposed budget. By statute, each year, the MWRA must transmit its budget to the Advisory Board for a review period of no less than 60 days. The MWRA typically transmits its CEB in February, and the Advisory Board typically approves its comments and recommendations in May, before the MWRA Board of Directors approves the final budget in June. The MWRA has proposed $749.1 million for its FY18 current expense budget, shown here in pie form. The smallest category of expense includes indirect expenses, shown in this chart in green, which makes up just 5.6% of the proposed budget. The largest piece of these expenses is the watershed reimbursement, including payments in lieu of taxes, followed by pension and other post-employment benefits expenses. In blue, spending for direct expenses totaling $238.4 million is the next largest category, the largest piece of which includes personnel-related costs, not only wages and salaries, but also fringe benefits and overtime, among others. All other direct costs include items such as utilities, chemicals, and maintenance. The largest component of the budget is capital financing in red, which at $469.1 million makes up 62.6% of the budget, with the vast majority being debt service, including fixed-rate debt, variable rate debt, SRF funding, and commercial paper. This ratio of capital financing is high for a public agency, but this chart shows how the MWRA got to this point and what's expected in the years to come. As noted before, capital financing makes up 62.6% of the proposed FY18 budget, meaning that all other expenses, direct and indirect, are 37.4% of the budget. What this chart shows is that non-capital financing costs in blue have remained relatively constant due to efforts of the Advisory Board and the MWRA over the years, including cost-containing initiatives such as the most recent staffing study proposed by the Advisory Board that recommended MWRA staffing levels be targeted at 1,150 employees, a target that the authority met in its FY17 budget and maintains in its proposed FY18. Compare this 1,150 FTEs to the MWRA's peak in 2000 when it had over 1,600 employees, and you can see the impacts of these recommendations on the bottom line. As this chart shows, earlier in the MWRA's history, non-debt costs were larger than capital financing, as in FY90 when the red portion makes up only 38% of the budget. By FY04, the balance had finally shifted, and capital financing finally exceeded other expenses. Looking ahead, this debt-dominated ratio is projected to peak in FY22, when capital financing will make up 65.4% of the CEB. Now let's compare the proposed FY18 budget with the existing FY17 budget. Direct and indirect expenses combined in blue increase by a proposed 5.9%, while capital financing in red increases by a proposed 3.1%. This seems counterintuitive considering the last chart's display of increasing debt costs and flat operating costs, but there's some specific and unusual reasons for this, which we'll discuss later. Combined, this results in a total increase in MWRA's expenses of 4.1%. It's important to note this increase is not the same as the rate increase most MWRA communities focus on. To determine that rate, let's look at the proposed revenues for FY18. The MWRA first takes the total expenses and subtracts out any non-rate revenues, such as investment income or green energy credits shown here in purple. After this is removed, the remaining expenses need to be funded by the MWRA's member communities, which is proposed at a 3.8% increase for FY18's wholesale water and sewer community assessments. This is what we commonly refer to in shorthand as the MWRA's wholesale rate increase. Now let's dive into some of the assumptions that are driving the authority's proposed FY18 budget. Starting with indirect expenses, where the largest category of expense relates to watershed operations at just over $25 million. These costs are actually made as a reimbursement to the Commonwealth for the Division of Water Supply Protection within DCR and is managed by the Water Supply Protection Trust. MWRA's control of the purse strings in this instance ensures adequate funding for the vital protection of MWRA's drinking water quality and protects this funding from the budget uncertainties of the Commonwealth. Moreover, it allows for the oversight of DWSP's budget and operations in the event it feels these core missions are not being met or are at risk. The next largest category of indirect expenses relates to the MWRA's pension and other post-employment benefit expenses. The MWRA recently achieved what it calls virtual full funding of the retirement fund, which triggered the advisory board's threshold for beginning contributions to the authority's OPEB liability. However, recent returns on the pension's investments have been less than ideal. As such, the MWRA proposes funding not only the pension's annual required contribution, or ARC, but also an additional payment of $1.8 million to help offset these losses. Meanwhile, it continues to make a contribution to OPEB equal to 50% of the ARC. It should be noted that the advisory board refers to this as the Actuarial Calculated Contribution, or ACC, to emphasize the point that at this time there is no annual required contribution, as there is for the pension. Turning now to direct expenses, the elephant in the room is an assumption related to the cross-harbor cable. Discussed in many previous documents and the advisory board videos, and currently an active court case involving the MWRA, this issue relates to a Massport project to dredge the shipping channel over Deer Island's primary power source, and more specifically, protecting the cross-harbor cable after the dredging project is complete. This dredging project has a deadline related to federal funding for the project, which is why it has come to a head, and all parties have agreed that work must proceed and responsibility for costs will be determined by the courts after the fact. The costs to dredge around and protect the cable are approximately $40 million, and these are costs being borne by Eversource for now while the court case proceeds. The MWRA has included about $4.4 million in its proposed FY18 operating budget for operating costs related to the cable protection project, including overtime as well as diesel fuel to run the on-island generators while the cable is offline for dredging and protection work. However, just recently, Eversource indicated that its timetable for completing the cable protection project extended significantly, and the costs associated with backup generation have now ballooned to an estimated $43 million, which could have devastating impacts on rate revenue requirements. Another notable assumption is MWRA's inclusion of 6 months of Enterococcus treatment at Deer Island. This relates to an expected provision of a new NPDES permit for Deer Island that would require additional chemical treatment. The included 6 months totals $600,000 in additional chemicals for the FY18 proposed budget. Turning now to the largest category of expense, debt service. The MWRA has increased its variable rate interest rate assumption to 3.5% in FY18 compared to the 3.25% budgeted for FY17, citing the recent increases to the Fed fund rate as the driving force for this change. This change in assumption increases the cost of variable rate debt by $1.2 million for FY18. Additionally, it has included $11 million as an optional prepayment of debt, as well as pay-go costs of $13.2 million, an increase of $1 million from FY17. On the revenue side, though the Fed fund rate increase costs the authority more on variable rate debt, the flip side is that it signals an increase in investment income for the authority. As such, the authority has budgeted an increase of 65 basis points for its investment income, which totals about $2.6 million. These are the highlights of the MWRA's proposed budget and the assumptions behind their numbers. More details are to come in the Advisory Board's official review, but already teed up is this approach. The MWRA has framed its budget using the term managing uncertainties, citing the recent increases and expected future increases in the Fed funds rate, as well as changes to the tax code under the new administration. The Advisory Board's review will center on the term managing risks. In our preliminary review, we believe that the MWRA may be overvaluing some risks, such as the financial uncertainties, Enterococcus treatment requirements, as well as pension and OPEB costs, while undervaluing other categories of risk, such as the cross-harbor cable costs, a belief borne out in the sudden dramatic increase in cost estimates for the cable protection project. At this point, we move into our formal no less than 60-day review period, which includes meeting with MWRA department staff to discuss the details of the budget and ultimately results in a final and formal set of comments and recommendations for approval at the Advisory Board's May meeting. That, in a nutshell, is the preliminary overview of the MWRA's proposed FY18 CEB. If you would like to view other editions of the Green Sheet or other informational videos, please visit our website or contact us at any time.